Let's talk about running back for the Denver Broncos, Javonte Williams. On Sunday, he ended up suffering a neck injury and was actually pulled from the game in the first quarter. The sports medicine staff took a look at him and then released him back into the game. And then later, it turns out that he was diagnosed with a stinger. So, a stinger, or a burner, as it's sometimes referred to in the international world, is basically a type of neck injury where the athlete's head gets turned to one side and then the shoulder is either held in place or pulled down. And when this happens, the nerves that exit the spine get put on this massive stretch. Nerves are really finicky. They don't tolerate any type of stress or strain or anything like that, like your muscles and tendons do. So people that end up with a stinger will sometimes feel numbness and tingling around their thumb or their arm, or sometimes they'll have transient weakness as well, temporarily, while that nerve signal is essentially just hyperextended and put on this brief pause. Stingers are a type of temporary nerve damage, so it's definitely not something to just brush off to the side. However, a lot of stingers are very, very transient or temporary in nature, so sometimes they'll go unreported just because, for example, in rugby, somebody will just take a hit and their thumb will feel tingly for a minute and then they'll just go on. Some stingers last for a couple seconds, some can last for a few minutes, and then some can even persist even longer than that. So when we look at the way that your spine is set up, it's basically a bunch of building blocks, right? And inside of those building blocks is your spinal cord. The space between those building blocks exits a spinal nerve root. And that's essentially what's getting stretched in a stinger. When we talk about the most common place for a stinger to occur, it's at the level of C5, C6, which is the middle of your neck. And that just has to do with all of the mobility that occurs through there, especially in a movement when you bring your ear over to the opposite shoulder as well. Important to remember that stingers are just on one side, right? So people will talk about that burning, numbness, and tingling, temporary weakness on being on just one shoulder, one arm. If those symptoms occur on both arms, that's definitely an indication that there may be a spinal cord injury. So in order for it to be a stinger, it just has to be just the one side. So in most cases, when people experience a stinger, you'll see them kind of shake out their arm, shake out their hand, things like that. We'll assess them, and if we determine that they do have a stinger, we'll temporarily hold them out from gameplay to make sure that the nerve gets a chance to settle down from that aggressive stretch on there. Before they go back in, we'll double check their sensation as well as their motor control to make sure that it's okay for them to go back into play. What happens if their symptoms persist? They're still getting that numbness and tingling, burning. They still don't have really good strength or motor control because of that nerve sensation and that temporary nerve stress. That's when we really have to do a little bit more testing. And, some of the tests that we can do are going to be looking more at the way that the nerves conduct down your arm. And we can do something called an EMG, which basically measures the amount of nerve conductivity or basically nerve signal that goes to the rest of your arm. The other thing to note is that stingers can definitely have some long-term consequences if somebody gets a bunch of stingers over and over again. So you don't want that repetitive microtrauma, especially to something that's sensitive like nerves. So typically, if somebody has more than 2 stingers in one season, that's an indication to go ahead and get further imaging like an MRI or X-ray, as well as a nerve conduction study to make sure that we're not doing any long-term damage by having that athlete continue. So this is why it's really important to talk to athletes that participate in a tackling sport to make sure that their tackling technique is correct and to make sure that they have good neck strength and good neck mobility